Welcome to this lesson on a Western interpretation of the transverse polar catabolic modalities of the global balance method. The first slide answers the question, why are these modalities labeled transverse polar catabolic? The final slide presents the principle of using basic nominal sums to label each individual modality within the category, along with a diagram of each mode and its color coding. Slide 1, Nomenclature. Why transverse polar catabolic? In keeping with the spirit of simplicity, there are two basic points to remember. First, transverse polar catabolic modalities treat illnesses across the transverse plane, such that hand treats foot and foot treats hand. Second, modalities in this category are of two general types, warming and drying or cooling and drying. As a result, they are expected to be useful in reducing moisture and correcting hot and cold conditions. Thus, the transverse polar catabolic modalities treat abnormal temperature variations across the transverse plane by either stimulating the hand's warming and drying meridians for the purpose of warming a patient suffering from a chill, or stimulating the foot's cooling and drying meridians in order to cool down hot conditions of fever. For the purpose of reinforcing the academic values given, a reading of the description behind the motives for the nomenclature will be provided here. The caption for the diagram found on the lower left-hand side reads as follows. In the transverse polar catabolic context, a treatment is applied to meridians on one side of the transverse axis or another. The meridians used for treatment in the catabolic context are either warming and drying or cooling and drying, depending on the side of the axis being treated. Catabolic hand vessels are warming and drying, while catabolic foot vessels are cooling and drying. The bullet points on the right provide the same information previously given from a slightly altered but entirely equivalent perspective. They are as follows. All axial modalities treat conditions with the side of the axis opposite to the side of the indication or injury. Transverse polar catabolic modes do this across the transverse plane, using the hand vessels to treat the foot vessels and the foot vessels to treat the hand vessels. In the transverse polar catabolic context, the periods of the vessel's peak circadian expression occur across opposing intervals separated by a period of about 12 hours. Polar catabolic modes are always composed of both warming, drying vessels and cooling, drying vessels. Basic treatments are then achieved by selecting a pair of warming and drying vessels on the hands or a pair of cooling and drying vessels on the feet. In general, the modality is named for its composition from the catabolic vessels of the transverse polar modalities. Slide 2, Basic Nominal Sums, Transverse Polar Catabolic 20, 28, and 36. The three modalities shown here are some of the more common patterns used in treating clinical complaints. Setting the semantics of their physiological expression aside, this material will provide a valid nomenclature useful for categorizing the modes themselves and their orientation within the scope of the global balance method. Proceeding from left to right, the transverse polar modalities are composed as follows. Transverse polar catabolic 20 consists of the colon and kidney vessels, labeled for their nominal equation 2 plus 8 plus 2 plus 8 equals 20. Transverse polar catabolic 28 consists of the triple burner and spleen vessels, labeled for their nominal equation 10 plus 4 plus 10 plus 4 equals 28. Transverse polar catabolic 36 consists of the small intestine and liver vessels, labeled for their nominal equation 6 plus 12 plus 6 plus 12 equals 36.